Hey everyone, and welcome back to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down all the Easter eggs and references from the 8th episode of the 4th season of Star Trek Lower Decks, the aptly titled Caves. This entry very smartly plays off more than one classic Star Trek trope by putting the main characters in a very familiar setting to fans of the franchise. We also got a sort of clip show in this episode of events that have already occurred but had not been seen on screen. This chapter also brings back an alien race from the original animated series and allows us to catch up with a few members of the Cerritos crew that we have seen in prior episodes. But before I get into everything I noticed, I want to thank you very much for clicking on this video and ask that you please hit that like button if you enjoy what you hear. Also, don't forget to subscribe so that YouTube lets you know when my future videos and podcasts come out. In case you are not aware, I also have a weekly podcast named WDIM News that comes out every Monday where I review Star Trek episodes and news, along with other things in the world of science fiction. This episode of Lower Decks begins with Boimler, Mariner, Tendi, and Rutherford all being assigned to the same mission in which they are to study a cave. Mariner is not too happy about this assignment and states that many of their missions take place in caves that all look the same, to which Boimler agrees. This is a reference to the filming of the series Star Trek The Next Generation, specifically what took place on Paramount Stage 16, which was a soundstage that was used many times when the crew took part in away missions. That soundstage, which was affectionately referred to as Planet Hell, was first utilized during the filming of the pilot episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Because it costs a lot of money to build new sets, this soundstage would sometimes only be altered slightly from episode to episode, giving the audience the impression that many planets that the Enterprise D visited looked eerily familiar. During this episode of Lower Decks, even though each character has a story about a prior experience in a different location, they all look very similar, further driving home this point. But this is also a reference to the classic Star Trek trope of having one or more characters trapped in a cave with no means of escape. This has been used at least a dozen times over the various different iterations of Star Trek, with my personal favorites being the DS9 episodes Heart of Stone, in which Odo and another character are trapped in a cave, as well as the episode The Sound of Her Voice, in which the crew of the Defiant attempts to rescue a Starfleet captain who is trapped within a cave. As they try and figure a way out, Boimler is the first one to reminisce about a prior time that he was trapped, in that case with Lieutenant Levy. This character has appeared now in 4 episodes of Lower Decks, the first being the Season 1 finale, No Small Parts, and is voiced by Fred Tatasciore, who voices many characters on Lower Decks, including Lieutenant Shax. Boimler and Levy cannot make contact with the Cerritos and have crashed in a shuttlecraft due to an ion storm. Ion storms are another Star Trek trope / MacGuffin that have been used quite frequently and were first mentioned on the original series episode Court Martial.
Captain's log, star date 2947.3. We have been through a severe ion storm.
Lieutenant Levy is suspicious of everything and believes that the pair are being stalked by a race of aliens known as the Vendorians. The Vendorians are a tentacled, non-humanoid species capable of shapeshifting who were first introduced in the original animated series episode titled The Survivor. Levy accuses the Vendorians of many conspiracies, including one that tricked the Federation into believing that ships using warp drive are damaging subspace. This is a reference to events that took place during the Next Generation episode Force of Nature, in which 2 scientists, who were apparently Vendorians, informed the crew of the Enterprise D that warp drive is destructive to the fabric of subspace. Rutherford then reveals that he was also trapped in a cave during a mission, in his case with Dr. T'Ana, and that he had a child. This is a reference to the Star Trek Enterprise episode titled Unexpected, in which the ship's male chief engineer Trip Tucker is unknowingly impregnated by an alien species. When Rutherford is touched by the alien and impregnated, you can briefly see a shimmer effect on his face, similar to the one used on Trip Tucker in that episode of Enterprise. Mariner then tells her story about being trapped with members of Delta Shift. These characters appeared in the first season episode, Terminal Provocations, and are the 4th duty shift on the Cerritos after the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma shift crews. This concept was first mentioned on screen during the 2-part Next Generation episode, Chain of Command, where then Captain Edward Jellicoe wished to eliminate one of the 4 standard shifts on the Enterprise D. This episode of TNG also had a plotline in which members of the crew must train for a dangerous mission within a planet's underground cave system, and was filmed in part on the Planet Hell set. Mariner, as well as the members of Delta Shift, experience rapid aging or de-aging thanks to the presence of chronotons, which are subatomic particles with temporal or time-altering properties and are known to be used in some cloaking devices. Chronotons are another well-used Star Trek MacGuffin that were first mentioned during the Next Generation episode The Next Phase, as the cause of LaForge and Ro Laren being phased out of known reality due to a Romulan cloaking device in the area. Rapid aging or de-aging is another commonly used Star Trek trope, with the first instance being on the original series episode titled The Deadly Years, where members of the Enterprise crew age rapidly due to radiation from a planet. But the episode I remember best is the Next Generation episode Rascals, where 4 adult characters are reverted to their 12-year-old state after a transporter malfunction. When Tendi finally gets to tell the story she has been trying to tell since the mission began, it turns out that it takes place immediately after the end of the first episode ever of Lower Decks, titled Second Contact. Since the animation style on Lower Decks has been slightly altered since the first season, it appears that all the scenes from the first episode that appear in this new episode have been recreated instead of using the original footage. While the 4 are trapped in a turbo lift, Ensign Tendi reveals that she was forced to relieve herself in the corner. I believe that this is a reference to an episode of the American sitcom The Office titled Nepotism, in which at one point the characters Dwight and Pam are trapped in an elevator and are forced to make a similar decision.
Stop drinking the water!
Being trapped in a turbo lift is another trope that has been used a few times on Star Trek before, with my favorite episode being The Forsaken from, once again, Deep Space Nine, in which Odo and Loxana Troi are trapped together. In the end, it appears as though it was the Vendorians who have created this situation for the crew, and they decide not to allow the Cerritos to contact them yet, so that the 4 can enjoy their time together longer. This is possibly another reference to the aforementioned episode of The Next Generation titled Rascals, since in that episode, after the other 3 characters are reverted back to their original age, Ensign Ro decides to remain a child for a bit longer to enjoy the experience. Well, that was everything I saw, but let me know in the comments if I missed anything. Thank you very much for watching to the end. Please remember to hit that like button before you go, and I'll see you next time on What Did I Miss?